All right. Hello, everybody. We're live today. We've got Brian LeRoux joining us from Begin and Enhance. Thanks so much, Brian, for joining. Super excited to chat all things Enhance and kind of where you are, helping kind of regain kind of sanity in the web development world. I think things have gotten crazy in the last maybe 10 years, and I'm excited to see some people rethinking it from like first principles and web standards and all the above, and also very excited to see that Extism has helped kind of play a little bit of a role to bring maybe more of what you're working on to the larger developer audience than the general web framework may. So
yeah, thank you for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
Awesome.
I'm a big fan of Extism, and we'll definitely dig into why.
Right on. Well, we appreciate the kind words. Whether you are all tuning in from X or Twitch, LinkedIn or YouTube, we're happy to take questions. Please interrupt, throw them into the chat. We'll put up questions here and there. If we don't get to it right away, apologies. I'm not always looking directly at the screen where the banners show up, but we will get to it. Charles behind the scenes, who's kind of playing DJ or video jockey, I guess, in the case of the live stream, we'll put up questions, and please feel free to remind us too that something is waiting if we miss it. What's up, Eduardo? Good to see you. Thanks for joining all the way from far away. Let's get started. Brian, do you want to give a quick intro on yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. I'm a web developer, self-identified web developer. I've been doing it since the literal 90s. So that's a while. But yeah, I got lucky, won the birth lottery, and the internet happened, and I was a nerd. And so I kind of grew up with the web. I graduated in 96. I remember seeing my first demos of the early web on like a Mosaic browser or something like that. I was like, this sucks. BBSs have images, and how wrong I was. Later, then of course it became what it is, and I kind of grew up along the way with it. Years later, I got really into the mobile web. I helped build a thing called PhoneGap. That was really fun and cool. That led me to building out a cloud service of all things called PhoneGap Build, which was this way to upload HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then we would compile it into IPA and APK files, or the native files for iOS and Android. That service got bought by Adobe, left Adobe in 2015 because I was really excited about chatbots. Funny enough, I thought at that time that most workloads were moving into like a messaging medium of some kind, and I felt like automation through chatbots was going to be a really big deal. I was totally wrong. That whole space fizzled out. I got really deeply into serverless in that process and became an AWS serverless hero. Got really deep on Amazon and backend, and then weirdly ChatGPT happened, and now chatbots are back. So I have no idea what's going on out there these days. But along the way, I've done a lot of different web development, built a lot of different systems through a lot of different abstractions, including React. And I was at the first JS conf where they announced it, and I was a big supporter of it in its early years. And in recent years, I've gotten more and more excited about web components and what the platform itself can do, and that's led us down a road to Enhance and where I'm at today.
That's awesome. Thanks for the background. One quick question on the PhoneGap. Was that like there was another competitor in that space, Cordova, I think, or was it overlap there?
Yeah, so Cordova is a street I live on in Vancouver, and when we were acquired by Adobe, they wanted the trademark and the asset and all the related stuff.
Okay.
Part of the deal we made with them is that we wanted to donate the source code to the Apache Software Foundation, and Apache was like, "That's cool, but we don't want the logo mark or any of the associated problems that could come with that." And so we had to give it a new name, and then PhoneGap became a distribution of Apache Cordova.
Oh wow, awesome.
Confusing
Okay,
legal stuff.
I was a very happy user of Cordova. I think we came a little late to this after PhoneGap had been acquired. So I was like, oh, there's that commercial thing, and then there's this open source one.
Yeah.
I mean, it was awesome. I loved working with that tooling, and it was, I mean, super impressive stuff. So.
Yeah, it was fun. It was just a hack. I mean, at the end of the day, we realized every native platform has an embeddable browser. And we were like, well, what if we full screen that, and then build a bridge to the native side? And it was a really crummy form function interface. I think we were doing like 300 ops per second though, so like it was good enough to get your geolocation or whatever.
Yep.
But it definitely, I think in many ways it proved that the web was going to be okay for mobile, but it also demonstrated how much work we had to do to get the web okay for mobile. And nowadays, I think with PWAs, there's very little argument for a native app to me personally. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was good for the time. Pretty fun. It
Cool.
worked on Blackberries too, which is super weird.
I don't know what the gesture is for the little nub scroll pad, but I
Uh,
imagine that's a fun detail to work with, fun user interaction to work with.
yeah, every one of their phones was a special, unique thing. That's for sure.
Well, it's pretty crazy to see how far that whole space has come and kind of how far we've taken the web platform. But it certainly seems like we're kind of shipping a lot to the web these days, and I don't
Yeah.
know, how much of that is really necessary. I think really cool projects like Svelte have come up where you're doing kind of pre-compilation, so you're reducing the amount of runtime and library surface area that actually has to be transmitted to the client. But the web has all these fundamental capabilities, and one of those is web components. Maybe for also like a kind of noob in the space like myself, but certainly for the audience too, who may be interested in kind of the first principles, basic understanding. Would you maybe give a little primer for us?
Yeah. So the cool thing about browsers in the modern era is that they auto update. And so back in the day when you were, visiting your parents' house at Christmas time, you would update their browsers because you were a web developer, and you'd go insane if you didn't do that. They were, using IE5 or something, and their bank didn't work. And that was really bad experience because basically whatever your operating system had, that's what you got. And in some ways, iOS is still stuck in this world today, where whatever your operating system gave you, then your browser is like frozen in amber for that time. And this led to things like jQuery, where we had to polyfill and backfill browser capabilities, and that even led later on to things like Babel, where we were transpiling syntax into semantics that would work on older browsers. We don't have that problem anymore. So browsers today are what's called evergreen. They auto update themselves. They stay roughly along the same baseline of capabilities, and those capabilities are really advanced these days. So things like transpiling and polyfilling really aren't as necessary as they used to be. You have a pretty good chance that if you're using a web browser, that it's going to have good baseline capabilities today. And along the way, a lot of what we were polyfilling and transpiling has been subsumed by the platform. So early JavaScript didn't have modules, no concept. You just included a script tag and everything was global. It was very cowboy. It led to all kinds of problems. Absolutely a bad idea, but that's how that worked. And so we invented a module system. We invented several, in fact. CommonJS and AMD were kind of the two front runners, and most people were transpiling to one or both. And that kind of doubled our code payload. Worse, you're adding a whole bunch of semantics, which may or may not be the actual semantics for closures or scopes of modules. So now we have modules, and they're pretty good. They've got some problems. They can waterfall. So if A includes B and B includes C, and these are all network calls, that can be slow. There's ways to get around it. You don't need a bundler to solve this problem. You can be smart, and you can preload things. You can use things like import maps. You can have a kind of a God file that includes everything, and it takes advantage of HTTP to load everything. Yeah, we have modules, and that was a big kind of building block. I think that we're still coming to terms with, because the compatibility for modules across JavaScript runtimes between browser and backend runtimes like Node hasn't been great up to this point. The other big primitive is components, and so a lot of people like to give React credit for components, but I want to correct the record on that one. There's been components for a long time, since before React. There's a really famous framework called Dojo. It had a component model like way before React existed, like I want to say around 2006. So we've known components are a pretty good abstraction for UI for a very long time. And it was kind of only a matter of time before that abstraction landed in browsers. So web components are not like React components. And so sometimes people say these aren't components, but words are tricky and they're kind of nebulous, but they are components and they do offer some of the benefits of components. So they give you an encapsulated interface. You extend a base class of HTML element. This lets you create what are called custom elements, which is kind of like the thinnest, most base component layer. So you could have like my dash checkbox, for example. The other big part for what is a web component is called the shadow DOM. And this is a type of closure or scope or encapsulation. And components are great. Shadow DOM is great. It can be useful. It can also be problematic. It can introduce kind of unexpected behaviors or bugs because it behaves differently than the light DOM. It does give you one big superpower though, and that's slots. And slots are an idea. If you're familiar with React, same thing as children. It's like child elements. And yeah, I think that's kind of the baseline. So today we have a lot of userland solutions, and those userland solutions are often dialects like JSX, or Svelte, or Astro, or Angular directives, or whatever. And people will say that's JavaScript. That's not JavaScript. That's a dialect that we compile into JavaScript. And because it's a dialect that we compile into JavaScript, it usually compiles to a lowest common denominator that recreates things like module systems and components in userland. This leads to a lot of extra code. If I just use the native platform features, I don't need to fill in the semantics for all this extra stuff. And so we're seeing JavaScript bloat out pretty badly in the broader web. These are just sort of general numbers, but if you look at Alex Russell's recent blog series about this, we're talking in the order of magnitude of megabytes of upfront JavaScript payload. And that's not great for user experiences. It's not necessarily bad. I'm not saying it's you're wrong or you're bad if you do this,
Sure.
but it is an opportunity to do better. And by better, I mean do less work and put more work on the platform that we have today.
Totally agree. So speaking of better, like I feel like some of the benefits of maybe non-web specific or web standard libraries and frameworks like React, et cetera, are that they make things a little more straightforward, a little easier for a developer to kind of get started with, just because of the swath of examples and things they can kind of tinker with. Would you be able to show us like a little web component example, maybe kind of even through the lens of Enhance? I linked to the docs on your components convention, but I feel like getting a little firsthand glance at kind of what a component is may also help kind of make it more concrete for folks.
Yeah, let's do a little mini demo. I'll set up to present. Screen. Think I'm sharing my screen?
You are.
There we go. Okay. So I just popped a terminal here, and I'm actually going to pop over back to my browser real quick. If you go to enhance.dev, you can see our docs. There, a lot of people when we first launched were like, well, web components, I don't know, can they be interactive? And so we wanted to do the most over-the-top interactive thing we could do. So we did this kind of wild site. But what's fun about this is there is really almost no JavaScript at all. We achieved almost all of this with just plain elements and CSS. And it's a pretty fun design that does lots of cool stuff.
I love it. One quick question.
And this character is like an axolotl. Yeah.
Is like exactly that guy. I think everybody wants to know what's the mascot's name, because that's the most important takeaway from all of this, right?
It's Axel. Axel the axolotl.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So if you view source on this too, this is another kind of neat thing about using the platform. I don't have a plugin installed or anything like that. This is just the source. And if you look, I don't know if I can blow this up.
Yeah.
But we have elements here. Like there's no such thing as site header element in HTML. That's a custom element that we created. Like begin masthead. And we got like landing intro. So you get much better semantics in your HTML when you build this way. Okay, but I'm gonna go Yeah, I think so. I think it's pretty fun. So I'm gonna pop back into my terminal. Just do, the docs quick start thing. Got to go to the internet and space and back. But we're gonna just generate like a little boilerplate hello worldy thing here. And of course, NPM is gonna be slow because I'm streaming and I'm in Canada. This will probably be faster on your computer at home. You're looking at maybe a worst case scenario here.
No problem. While we're waiting for it, maybe we can just kind of quickly do an overview and like what is Enhance and what are the goals of bringing a framework to web components and what are the things it
Yeah.
solves. Of course.
Well, okay, so yeah, why do a framework? Well, we felt that first of all, the userland dialect that generates JavaScript that you then execute to create HTML is very well explored. We don't need more of those. But a framework that lets you server-side render web components at the time of when we launched this was completely unique. Nobody else was doing this. Lit HTML and other web component type things were very client-side centric. And so we wanted something that just let us work local and work with HTML to start. So it's got like a couple dependencies, not very many. And one of them is going to give me this little dev server. I'm going to just start that. And if I hop over localhost, we can see here's my baseline skeleton. And so the source for this page lives in app pages index.html. How nice is that? There was no transpile step. There's no tricks up my sleeve. This is just plain old boring HTML that anyone can write with a .html extension. So that's like the first nice thing. There's no distance between you and the platform you're working on, which is great. But
that's awesome.
I probably don't want, the enhanced style thing here. So I'm just going to be like, hello world, save that. If I pop over, it says hello world, does the auto updating thing. That's great. I'm going to add an element to this. And so I'm going to do my header just to start. Header. And so you can do a classic kind of my class extends HTML element, but we've got a shortcut here that just lets us do more of a functional style, which is probably more familiar to React developers.
Sure.
Header. And so this function, first argument is this HTML tag template literal helper. And that's actually our renderer. And I'm just going to put like header, whatever, You can see it's not too intense. So I called this my header here. And so in here, it's going to add the markup for my header. And we've got a header element. If we expect this, you can see it's got my header. And then inside of that, it's got the header element and then just this empty string that we had in my page. So that's kind of neat because now I can start creating layouts and I can start reusing markup. And this is running a node on the back end. So anything node can do, this function can do. And if we want, we can start bringing stuff into the foreground, like we want to progressively enhance this with some JavaScript on the client. That's open to us. But something I like to point out to people, most elements on a page, like this is our docs, right? Most of this page does not require client-side JavaScript in any way whatsoever. We've got a little bit for this video player. We've got our Google tag stuff. And what else do we have here? Oh yeah, we're doing some syntax highlighting. Very little. And you'll notice we're also not minifying it at all.
Yeah, totally.
Because why would we? There's like less than 5 kilobytes of it. So it's really going to get handled mostly by compression through the network using a CDN. So that's like at the highest level, you just define custom elements. And for the most part, most elements are going to be inert. They're not going to run on the client. and you're going to get an HTML a page that expands all those elements um, before it comes to the browser.
It's super impressive. Like the level of like straightforwardness alone is mouthwatering.
Yeah,
I
and
will
all your tools work. Like there was I
those
don't
work.
look at
And
this or
most importantly, it's like it's DHH approved plain JavaScript, HTML, and CSS.
yeah. And so we wanted something that was like more treating the custom element upgrade and the client side JavaScript as an upgrade. And
Yeah,
so you get a baseline working, and sometimes we call this progressive enhancement. Lately, the cool kids are calling it islands architecture. I think that's fine. Whatever you want to call it, we're giving users working HTML, CSS, and then if JavaScript works, then of course that takes over and does its job. And this is nice because JavaScript does fail. I often hear people say, no one disables JavaScript. And I think that's true. People probably don't. But JavaScript disables itself a lot. There are whole companies built on JavaScript error monitoring, and there's a good reason. Because when JavaScript does fail, it's usually pretty catastrophic. Like
yeah,
everything goes down with it. If you're client rendering and you forgot to wrap a try catch around a fetch that fails, you're going to have a bad day. You're not going to render anything. You're going to get a blank page. And that's a terrible user experience. And we shouldn't be relying on client JavaScript for that reason.
awesome. So before we move on, would it be fair to say that like one of the pieces that Enhance is providing is kind of bridging like the standards-based web component API and the familiarity of like more modern JavaScript frameworks that people are more accustomed to using?
Yeah, so we started off using it inside of our own serverless functions just to render HTML.
Okay.
And then on very rare occasions, we would write an accompanying class that would activate on the client when custom element define runs. And so um, one example, like a password strength hint. Be really crummy if every time you press a button that it reloaded the page to tell you if the password was strong enough. You want to do a fetch and like or not. You just want to like read that password and display it. And so like that's a perfect example of progressive enhancement. I don't want to not accept the submit of the form. I definitely want to accept the submit of the form, but I also want to give you some feedback while you're typing to show you that this is going to be a good enough password. And that's what progressive enhancement's all about. It's not about no JavaScript. It's about making the experience better with JavaScript. Now the problem is the DOM APIs are pretty verbose, and it can be a bit funky. This is what has led to a lot of things like Svelte and Astros and whatnot, where we get these more terse syntaxes. And so that's part of what we wanted to do. But we didn't want to invent a new dialect because we didn't want to invite transpiling to the party because we think that adds a lot of brittleness to build steps, to dependencies, and to debugging in the future. If you transpile your code when you have a bug, which you will, you're going to have a bad day if you don't have a good stack trace, which you probably won't.
Yeah.
Sometimes source maps work. I think we all agree at this point they don't always work. And now you're left console log dart throwing, waiting for deploys to happen, and that's just not a good mean time to recovery. So generally in backend, it's not controversial to say the code I wrote should be the code that runs. Like you want to keep your staging, your production environments very similar for that reason, so that you can reproduce bugs and mitigate them quickly. I don't know if front end got that memo, but it would be cool if it did, because I think a lot of problems that we have online are downstream of transpiling.
Absolutely. Awesome. So like I write a little bit of JavaScript. I don't write a ton. And if I'm writing, something for a backend service, I may choose a different language. And I would love
Yes.
to leverage something like Enhance and do server-side rendering, but I don't want to run a little node service to just like write the HTML
Right.
out response.
Or
Is
maybe
there
you can't.
how do we do that?
Maybe there's another one that comes up a lot. Big companies are not uniform in what stack they run. In fact, most big companies are actually a bunch of acquisitions that have happened over time. And every one of those acquisitions had a special stack of their own. And so it's very common for a company to be running a backend that has some Node, has some Java, has some Python. And now, if you have a design system that needs to be shared across those backends, you got to re-implement that whole thing on every one of those backends. It's incredibly inefficient and ends up creating uncanny valleys between these runtimes. So this is and the other thing, requiring Node is not great. Um, a lot of front end frameworks make the assumption that everyone wants to write their whole application in JavaScript, and most applications, frankly, probably aren't written in JavaScript. Now, a lot are, and that number is always growing, and it's definitely the most popular on GitHub. That's cool. If you go to the enterprise, there's a lot of Java running our world. There's a lot of Python running our world. There's a lot of Go running our world. And yeah, this is what got us pretty excited about Extism. We initially started thinking, okay, well, is it possible to embed a JavaScript interpreter in a Wasm runtime and then execute that in different backend languages like Go or Rust or Python or what have you? And the answer is yes, you can do this. And so we started playing with this idea, and we were using all kinds of different tools to do it, and it was really janky across different runtimes. I think we looked at Wasmer and Wasm Time and like there were just all these different ones, but none of them had good breadth. And then we came across Extism, and we were like, oh, thank God, this is like one way to do it, but it works in all these different backends. And I think we actually had a prototype like in a day. Like
Wow.
and yeah, wow, because we were like, this is crazy awesome. Like we could now conceivably create an entire design system for a company, all the components defined in just standard HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and use that design system in any backend runtime you want. And that's a super powerful idea. For a lot of companies today, there's a ton of duplicated work going on, a lot of unnecessary duplicated work, and crummy experiences, frankly. Like, there's no way you're getting that combo box the same for every backend. But if there's only one definition of it, then it is doable.
So I love that use case. Like, of course, a huge enterprise is going to have just a absurd number of diverse systems of different languages, frameworks used, and the design team, they don't care. They're not interested in if it's Java or Ruby serving up the component. So to be able to abstract that away and say, it doesn't really matter, actually, it's serving web standard stuff, but you get to embed this kind of cool library to make it happen and make it possible in languages that don't otherwise run JavaScript like the web does. So it's always funny to see how WebAssembly is, instead of trying to like kill JavaScript, like so many people thought early on, browser runtime, it's actually bringing JavaScript into way more places and making JavaScript more useful rather than the opposite, which
I totally agree. I thought, I remember the early, when Mozilla first started working on these ideas, it was like, wow, a common bytecode. Like that seemed like science fiction, but like, whoa, it happens to be able to execute in any browser. Well, that's interesting. And now where it's gotten to today, it did. And like the promise originally was, oh, now you can write your front end in any language.
Yep.
Turns out that's not what's interesting at all. What's interesting is now we can take all the value and growth in the front end and bring that to different backends. Also intermingling good tools for good jobs. Like Python has an incredible, set of utilities for string manipulation and machine learning. And why not bring that into your Go code base or whatever? And this gives you a pretty clean path to do it, which
absolutely,
I think, yeah, it's funny how in tech we're always like, oh, this is going to kill jobs, or this is going to like the scarcity mindset, but really this creates more abundance. Actually,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Very cool. Well, what's your favorite language you've embedded Enhance SSR into that's not JavaScript? Where do you like to go?
Yeah, so we by PHP just because it's fascinating to me. So if you go to enhance.dev/wasm, you can see what we've. I was going to see if I could go there. I won't do the share screen thing actually. So if you go to enhance.dev/wasm, you can see like our initial coverage, and we've got examples now for Dino, Django, .NET, Go, Java, Node, PHP, Python, Rails, Ruby itself, Rust, and WordPress. And that WordPress one was actually pretty interesting to me. So WordPress is a very webby thing. It probably powers most of the internet. Spoiler alert, PHP probably powers most of the internet, as you know, at Facebook, Slack, I don't know, lots of places you just would not expect are still running PHP. And they're kind of going down this weird road with their block editor and React these days, and it creates this really strange uncanny valley where you're writing React, but it generates HTML. And it's a slow, weird compilation process that's kind of an uncanny valley that creates somewhat unreadable markup as a result. Not very semantic, it's super funky feeling. I don't have a whole lot of confidence that it doesn't break a lot personally. And yeah, this would give a WordPress the ability to be web native cleanly with the UI definitions written in just standard JavaScript. And that's compelling. And the amount of code is honestly ridiculously small to do this stuff. And there's again no transpile step, no uncanny valleys. It's just regular old use your browser tools and debug it, and yeah,
Totally.
lower level,
I'd
nicer.
love more WebAssembly in the PHP ecosystem, and I think like it's challenging because you've got to right now link to an external shared library. The runtime has to be kind of approved, blessed by PHP when you start PHP, which is
That's
fine.
right.
There's a lot of security concerns in the mix, but if PHP had a more native story for WebAssembly, I think it would make all of this so much easier and bring just a rich amount of new opportunities in code to the language.
Matter of time, I think. Like they're all gonna. There's a weird trend going on right now where I see a lot of backend languages embracing WASM, and this is giving us these nice interop pathways. I'm seeing a lot of what JavaScript does getting subsumed right now by CSS. And so a lot of the reasons we had to write JavaScript on the client are going away. And a lot of the reasons we had to write JavaScript on the server are now also going away at the same time, which I don't think anybody predicts really. But it seems to me that like a lot of what we are doing today, maybe we don't need to do to get even better outcomes.
Absolutely. Hey, the web keeps getting stronger and more powerful, and we get to bring some of that to other languages with WebAssembly. So
yeah,
all good
totally.
stuff. Brian, I want to be mindful of time. I know you're a busy guy. Thank you so much. We blew through that half an hour. That was incredible.
Yeah.
I learned a bunch. Is there anything before we go that you want to share or point folks to? Can they get involved? Enhance is
so you can. Yeah, Enhance is under the OpenJS umbrella. It's a foundation-backed thing. So we depend on volunteers and help. And we are by no means such polyglots that we know our way around all these languages super well. So more examples and more people playing around with the different branches of Enhance Wasm is very welcome. We've got some pretty strong Django and Ruby people in the room now, but I would love it if you're a .NET, a Rust, or I'm sorry, if you're a Java guy, my condolences, but please, we do need your help, and come join us and help us make web components run everywhere.
All right, you heard it. Java guys, can please join Enhance's community and help improve the story there. Drop the link, go check it out. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Brian, this was a pleasure. Hope to have you back at some point and share more about what's going on. Until good luck with everything, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.